The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. So just a quick note based on yesterday's show and yesterday's bonus show and today's broadcast show. I talked yesterday on the bonus show about my hesitation to just speak frankly about some trans-related issues. Again, speaking as someone who is just a massive supporter of trans rights and anti-discrimination. And I got a lot of emails from people, Pat, saying, hey, you know what, David? You're basically right about this. And even actually from some trans folks in our audience. And they encouraged me to speak more publicly. And that's what led to today's editorial piece at the top of the show, just saying, hey, I've been self-censoring on some issues. And I know there will be some blowback. Our bonus show audience is not representative of the overall political audience. I know that. But I still think that it's a move in the right direction, just to speak frankly about issues of importance.
Yeah, that's great. And, honesty, forthrightness, those are values that we want to see encouraged here on the David Pakman Show. So I'm happy about that. Every now and then, there's a story that we want to cover, but we think, how is our left-wing audience going to react to this? And ideally, we wouldn't even have to have that concern. We'd just be able to put everything out there in the open.
Yeah.
But we have to kind of think about how the audience is going to react to some of those controversial issues, and that's exactly what you've been doing.
And Pat is going to have a list for me tomorrow of values that we should not be so keen on. So he gave us a list today of values we should be keen on. Tomorrow I'll have a fully prepared list of values to not allude to in any kind of way. Okay, Boris Johnson is becoming the Prime Minister of Britain. And this is sort of, the way I see it, Pat, is this is the start of the next phase of what I call May Brexit. It may be Brexit. We don't really know. He is a Brexiteer. He says he will get Britain out of the EU by the end of October, no matter what kind of a deal is or is not struck. He will be replacing Theresa May and has won the leadership of the Conservative Party just hours ago. So, okay, we'll see where this goes. I don't know. Here's the thing. When people ask about what should Israel do about X, what should the UK do about Y, I'm fine commenting on it to some degree, but ultimately it really is up to them to figure out what it is that they want and need to do. That being said, public opinion since the Brexit vote has changed. And my latest information I have, Pat, is that if the vote were held today, the country would choose to remain. And I still think that that is something that, because it's been so long, has to be considered.
Yeah, although with the Conservatives still having a majority in Britain, I don't think there's any chance that they're going to present a new referendum in front of the public. So that is the downside to that. Even though we have those polling numbers that are strong in favor of staying with the European Union, ultimately they're rendered irrelevant. It's kind of like when we have a presidential election here. Trump skated by, got the vote, got elected, and even though shortly after he was elected, you saw his approval ratings in the toilet, doesn't seem to matter. You still have to wait in a whole nother 4 years before you can have the vote again. And yeah, this is really interesting. It is kind of like the new phase, especially because Boris Johnson says that he's just willing to get out of the European Union with or without a deal. I think that if they leave the European Union without a deal, it's going to have significant ramifications to the economy, though. And we're already starting to see the value of the pound drop because of just this whole idea. I think that would be a disaster.
And it's not necessarily going to be particularly good for the American economy either, only because of the level of globalization and interconnectedness that there now is, particularly with such a significant political and economic ally like the UK. I don't care if my instinct the day after the referendum vote is right or wrong. To remind you, the day after the vote, I said, great, here are the results. I don't know that Britain will ever actually leave the EU. I still don't have strong feelings one way or the other, Pat, about the way that this is ultimately going to go.
Yeah, like if Boris Johnson backs off and he says that he's unwilling now to leave the European Union without a deal, what's the next stage? Is there even one? Will another politician take up the mantle? Hard to predict. And it's also interesting to see what the dynamic will be between Trump and Boris Johnson, because they are sort of ideologically aligned.
Yes.
They also look quite similar.
Yes.
They both have that disheveled blonde hair. So if you see the two of them together, you may not be even able to tell them apart. And we'll have to see how Ivanka is able to deal with Boris Johnson, because that's another concern that we have to have in this day and age.
Yeah, that's a really important thing, and we're going to be tracking their hair extremely closely with new technology, 360 technology that we have. We will be doing mock-ups of how the hair compares and which one is more or less like a helmet and all. I'm kidding. Obviously, we're not doing any of that stuff. Okay, Equifax. I guess I should restate before I tell you the news. Equifax is one of the three major credit bureaus in the United States. It's Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. Equifax was massively breached. I don't even remember. I'm in my head, I feel like it was 2018, but it was actually 2017. It's been longer. Yeah. They were breached, and the personal information of 150 million people was exposed. They have now reached a settlement of $700 million to state and federal regulators to settle a bunch of different probes. Equifax will pay at least $300 million or as much as $425 million to compensate the people affected. They will also pay $275 million in civil penalties and other compensation to a variety of states in the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There is so much here to unpack. Number one, as I've said before, very often when these big corporations do something wrong, a lot of the make good fines that they pay don't go to the people that were wronged. And in this case, again, about 35 or 40% of the settlement is going to go to the states that were affected, whose people were affected, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I know why there are reasons for some money to go to those entities. But again, what about the money for people that have been affected? That's number one. Number two, I don't know if you remember back when this happened, I mentioned there was a website that would tell you, was your information stolen or not? And when I put in my information, it came back and said, it is possible that your information was affected. It didn't say definitively. If it was a definite no, it would say no. But if it was possible, it would say that it's possible. I have been dealing with an insane situation for the last 4 months where I've had to get 4 new credit cards in the last 6 weeks. And it goes beyond that, of fraudulent charges that are appearing and credit cards attempted to be opened in my name, to the point where I had to put a block on my credit, where now even if I want to open a new account, I need to prove my identity. It's a whole crazy thing. And I've been going, do I have malware on a computer? Is that the issue? What is going on? And ultimately, what seems most likely is that my information, the likes of which would be obtained from a company like Equifax, was breached, and it may be related to this.
Yeah, did you have to go about having purchased some like credit monitoring service or like some added security? Because I think a lot of that settlement money is going to go into reimbursing people who went out of their way to make sure that they were protected even after this breach. Were you able to do any of that, or did you just kind of skip that step altogether?
I did get, so when some fraudulent inquiries showed up, people trying to open like all sorts of weird credit cards that I would never sign up for, I did sign up for some credit monitoring just long enough. It was like 2 months to make sure that some of those inquiries were removed from my credit report. And then I canceled it. So I don't know. I guess I'm in like $50.
Okay. So maybe you do stand to be one of the beneficiaries of this settlement.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic. I remember I checked that website the exact same day that you did, and I also got the exact same message that my information may have been breached. Not a definitive yes, not a definitive no, but thereafter I didn't take any further action, partially because I feel like it impacted so many Americans, like over 100 million.
Yeah.
That I feel like when you have that many people affected, there's sort of like this disbursement of responsibility, and no one feels like they have to actually take they have to like follow through with it all. But maybe that's kind of flawed logic. And apparently Equifax knew about this hole in their security system months before the breach happened, and they didn't do anything to try to stop it. So for that alone, they should have to face some sort of penalty.
Yeah, we'll see ultimately what happens. And when so many people's information is stolen, the parties doing the breach, it can take them a while to start working through some of that data and start attempting to open accounts in people's names. So like for me, if it is indeed related to the Equifax breach, and I probably will never know for sure, it took almost 2 years for them to actually get to starting to open accounts in my name. And with the number of 150 million records stolen, it could be many years before people start suffering the effects of that. A lot of that information not used by those doing the breaching, but it's sold to others who want to attempt to open credit cards in people's names and that type of thing. It's a mess. And we'll have more information about the settlement specifically when that information is made available. Former U.S. Senator Al Franken now says he regrets resigning from the Senate back in 2017 after this incident in which he was pictured sort of, I don't even know how to describe it, Pat. It's like holding his hands over the breast area of a flak jacket that radio host Leanne Tweeden was wearing at the time. Or no, I'm sorry, I'm confusing. Am I confusing two different Al Franken stories now?
Well, there was the claim made by Leanne Tweeden that Al Franken aggressively kissed her when practicing for a Saturday Night Live tweet. Right. I don't know if she was the same woman in the picture.
She was.
And in that picture that you're referencing, Al Franken wasn't actually touching her, but had his hands kind of hovering over her breast as if he was like trying to make a joke out of the whole thing.
So this is one of those areas. Listen, you don't have to defend any of Al Franken's actions, just to point out that this is an area in which Democrats, by virtue of just being better on this issue than Republicans, shoot themselves in the foot. Because there's no question that what Al Franken did was in poor taste, et cetera, et cetera. But 48.3% of the people who voted in the Alabama special election between Doug Jones and Roy Moore voted for Roy Moore despite multiple sexual assault allegations, including against teenage girls. And he still got almost 50% of the vote and almost won. On Donald Trump, accused of 16, 17, 18 sexual assault incidents. And despite that, he was still elected president of the United States. There's a child rape allegation. It's crazy. On the other hand, Anthony Weiner sexts a picture to some 15-year-old. No Democrats stand behind the guy. He's completely shunned from the Democratic Party. Al Franken is in a picture that is admittedly in poor taste. Even Democrats say he should resign, and he does, and Democrats give up the seat. And now in the context of everything that's happened in the last 2 years and everything people have gotten away with, it's not only Franken who's saying he regrets resigning. A whole bunch of the Democrats who said he should resign also regret calling for his resignation.
Well, I think there definitely should have been due process. They definitely should have had an investigation into it within the Senate before making any decisions. Ultimately, though, I don't think it was Democrats necessarily shooting themselves in the foot, because at the time, this was overlapping with the Roy Moore versus Doug Jones election. And I think Democrats wanted to make it seem as though they had a moral high ground on this issue, on sexual harassment, sexual assault, the whole Me Too scandal stuff, because on the one hand, they have this accusation coming to a member of their own party, Al Franken, and they're telling him to resign at the same time as telling the voters in Alabama not to vote for Roy Moore and to go with Doug Jones instead because of the allegations made against Roy Moore. And even though they ousted Al Franken, he had a seat in Minnesota that could easily just be replaced with another Democrat. Democratic governor in Minnesota could appoint a successor to him, and they wouldn't turn that blue seat red. It would just stay in the hands of the Democrats. So I don't know if that necessarily caused them any sort of political ramifications, but they definitely did seem to throw him under the bus a little bit early. And I think they could have at least dragged it out, let him have his say, let there be an investigation before arriving at any conclusion.
Well, the reason it happened so quickly is, as you're suggesting, that they wanted to avoid the appearance of applying different standards to Republicans than to Democrats. They wanted to show any of this behavior we will not tolerate. And you're right that in the case of Al Franken, before there was really a proper process, they were saying, look at how not partisan we are by saying Al Franken should resign. And arguably, again, without excusing his actions, it may well have been the wrong decision now in retrospect.
Yeah, and actually, this kind of overlaps with what's going on now with Kirsten Gillibrand's campaign, because I think she was the first Democrat, at least in the Senate, to call for his resignation. Remember, she was talking to reporters. She asked if he had resigned yet. Yeah. And when the reporters said no, she said, oh, well, he should resign. He should resign. As if it came across as if she hadn't talked about it with her staffers and her colleagues and just kind of spoke off the cuff. And that later resulted in more Democrats backing Kirsten Gillibrand and ultimately calling for Franken's impeachment. He decided to, or Franken's resignation, and he decided to leave. But now what's happening is the rank and file in the party are not so happy with Kirsten Gillibrand, over Al Franken's removal, and now it's kind of coming back to bite her because she's not doing so well in the 2020 presidential election cycle.
Yeah.
She's polling at 0%.
Well, in any case, I think whatever she demanded of Al Franken, it was not going to be a difference maker in her presidential campaign. That I think I can say with with absolute and total certainty. Let me know what you think about the way the entire Al Franken situation developed and ultimately played out. And maybe most interestingly, if it happened today rather than 2 years ago, would it be handled differently by Democrats? Should it be handled differently by Democrats if a similar situation happens today, an equivalent situation? Let me know what you think. That's it for today. New show, new bonus show tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.